Hey guys, I hope you're doing well. Thought I would record another video, and this time we would discuss working with Photo Etch. I will be the first to admit that when I first started using Photo Etch, I was not very good at it either. Um, I had pieces sticking to my fingers. I had pieces dropping down onto the model, or I had glue on them. It was just a mess. And it's only through trial and error that I've come up with several techniques that I think can help you out, and I hope you find this informative. Okay guys, let's talk about arguably one of the most important aspects of Photo Etch, and that is your tools. This particular set of Squadron tweezers are the best I've seen. They have large to really small tweezers. They are going to enable you to manipulate the Photo Etch much easier than any other tool I've found on the market or that I was using prior to this. So I highly recommend you pick up a set. Okay, let's talk about some of the tools you're going to need to accomplish this goal. First thing I want to talk about is just a regular piece of plexiglass. You're going to need a hard surface to cut the Photo Etch on, and I always use a piece of plexiglass. That way you cut your piece and you're on to the next thing. If you do not cut Photo Etch on a hard surface, you will bend it, and that just causes more issues. Next thing, white piece of paper. White piece of paper is going to go on top of my plexiglass sheet. So when I go to cut Photo Etch, voila, it highlights the pieces much more so than if I did not have it. So I like having the white piece of paper so I can get really close in on that piece that I'm about to cut from the fret, and if you can cut it correctly and closely the first time, then you don't have to repeat the cutting process once it's free from the fret. These are your garden variety needle nose pliers. I use these quite a bit for bending the Photo Etch. You know, I put the Photo Etch in there, just use my fingernail and bend it to what I need. I've never purchased any of those Photo Etch bending tools. I've always used this and my fingernails. Although I did recently pick up the Tamiya brand needle nose pliers for bending Photo Etch, and actually I like these pretty good because you could see how thin the needle is, the pliers, this portion of the pliers. So when you get into some really skinny Photo Etch like ladders, these are pretty cool. Okay, so let's talk about cutting pieces from the fret. You can see the knife is pointing to the piece I'm about to cut. Now, once you actually go to cut the piece, you want to get the knife as close to the piece as possible without actually bending or cutting the piece. That way when you cut it, you do it right the first time. You don't have to, file it or go back through and cut off any excess. Again, that's where your white piece of paper comes in, that after you've cut the piece, you want to take a look at it and make sure that you actually cut it cleanly from the fret. If not, then just go ahead and take another stab at it and clean it off. Okay, let's talk about segmenting our work as it relates to applying the Photo Etch to the model. Here you can see the bridge of the USS Missouri in its initial state. And what we did is we ground it down, we got rid of the windows. Now we're going to install Photo Etch windows. And you can see I bent the Photo Etch to match the shape of the bridge. And then what we do is we glue the very front first. We put that into place, and then we start working our way around to the other segments of the Photo Etch until finally it is in place and it's locked down. This is the method that I prefer, because if you try to glue it all at once into place, inevitably it's not going to line up properly, and the photo etch is going to end up adhering to a portion of the plastic you don't want it to, and now we've got a mess on our hands because you got to try and peel it back up without bending it, and it just becomes a big headache. So make it easy on yourself, break it down into segments, and you'll be good to go. Okay, let's talk about actually gluing the photo etch to your ship or your plane or what have you. A couple more tools we're going to talk about real quick. Little post-it note, and of course your trusty CA or crazy glue for models. And then I also have on here, let me get it where you can see it, I have a little fine tip attached to my CA as well. I never apply CA straight out of the bottle. I always have the small tip, and rarely do I actually use the tip to apply CA to, let's say for instance, the ship. Almost all of my CA goes on a post-it note. That's for a couple reasons. I can control how much CA gets onto the photo etch. And I do it one of two ways. If you have your tweezers and you have your part, you can dip the photo etch into the little pool of CA that you've applied to your post-it note. Sometimes also what you're going to do, like in that last segment where we had the bridge that was sort of like U-shaped, the windows for the bridge, I should say. So what you can do is you can take your pliers and dip the very front part of the photo etch into your CA, then you apply it to the ship and you let it sit for 5 minutes. Then I can take my photo etch. I almost always put it on the very corner because it's easy to manipulate. I put it on the corner of the post-it note, and then I slide it in between the photo etch and the ship, and you could see the CA, you could see when it's actually touching the photo etch. And what's nice is you can apply it to the bottom of the photo etch and then it just goes straight down and boom, you're rocking and rolling. Sometimes I will use my hobby knife to press down on it, especially if you're doing railings. You can put your hobby knife in on that bottom railing, push down on it, and you've locked it into place, you're good to go. So again, I put CA on the center or in the center of the pad, and I dip parts in it, and then I apply them to the ship or to the plane. And then again, if you're doing railings, you could dip the first part of the railing in there, lock it down on the ship, and then take your post-it note, especially the corner, and you can lift it up with your finger, with your tweezers. A lot of times it's going to be sticking up anyways because one part's down, the other part isn't. And you just slide it under there, okay? Slide it under there like so, and then lock it down, and you're good to go. This is also a good technique for repairing railings. Different people have different approaches. Personally, I throw railings on as soon as possible so I can paint them. Once you paint them, they get locked down. They're much harder to come up and you're good to go. But let's say you put them down and they come up for some reason. Boom, slide that in there, lock it back down, and you're good to go. Here you see some examples of my applying CA to the corner of a post-it note, and then I'm ready to slide that post-it note in underneath the photo etch, but on top of the plastic where it's going to sit. I apply my photo etch, push down on it with a hobby knife, you're good to go. Okay, so some last thoughts. Whenever you're cutting photo etch, make sure you always use a curved blade. If you use a regular blade, you'll cut the tips off, you'll break them off, and it'll be no good to you. This goes without saying, I'm going to say it anyways. The area needs to be well lit. That will enable you to see where you're putting the part onto the plane or the ship. Furthermore, when I'm actually dipping my photo etch in the CA located on my post-it note, I'm actually watching the CA, and when I see the CA start to move, I know my part is making contact, and I can go from there. Keep in mind, you don't need a ton of CA on these things. The less the better. Last thing is, when you're placing the part onto the ship or onto the plane, once it's on, leave it. If it's a little bit off, it's not a super huge deal, because when you go to pull up parts that were previously placed, generally you're going to break them or you're going to bend them. And you're going to bend them to such an extent that it's very hard to get them back to their original shape. So my general rule is, unless it's really jacked up, leave it in place. But if you must take it back up, take a hobby knife, pair of tweezers, and just start cutting along the bottom where the CA has made contact with the ship and the photo etch, and slowly pull it up and cut at the same time, and you might be able to get it back to its original shape. I hope you found the video informative. If you have any questions or comments, obviously you can post them to my YouTube page and it'll automatically send me a message and I'll answer any questions that you have. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.